Welcome to another pop-up event with the Coinbase Institute. I'm your host, Hermine Wong, director of the Coinbase Institute. Our goal is to host these pop-ups in real time as crypto policy events unfold and get quick takes from experts to unpack these issues. For this event, our guests are here to chat with us about crypto mixers, sanctions, and the First Amendment. You may have recently heard that OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the US Treasury Department, imposed sanctions on Tornado Cash. The government alleges that Tornado Cash has been used to launder virtual currency since its creation in 2019, including money stolen by a hacking group sponsored by the North Korean government. However, many in the crypto community don't understand how the US government can sanction an application running code rather than specific individuals or entities. So now you may be wondering, what is a mixer? What does it mean for the government to sanction computer code rather than the illicit actors using it? And what do these sanctions mean for crypto, coders, and financial privacy online? To dive into this, we've invited three amazing experts. First, John Cafanick, our Vice President for Global Intelligence here at Coinbase, where he is responsible for managing our teams globally in investigating and combating crypto-related criminal activity. Formerly of PayPal and a US Marine. Brandon Van Grack is a partner at Morrison Foerster and co-chair of their National Security and Global Risk and Crisis Management Group. Brandon served for over 10 years at DOJ and is an expert on sanctions and export controls. And John Callis is the Director of Public Interest Technology at the Electronic Frontier Foundation and a cryptographer, software engineer, user experience designer, and entrepreneur, and formerly of Apple. Welcome to all of you. Thank you again for joining me today. For our audience, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the YouTube chat feature. And if we have time, we'll try our best to get to them. But let me start off first with John. John, can you help unpack for our audience, what are mixers and how are they used in crypto transactions?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question, Hermine. So essentially, mixers give the ability for a user to kind of, if you imagine a funnel, crypto goes in one end. It is an address that you own. You put it into this mixer, comes out the other end, completely different. For example, Bitcoin, and that is used to kind of hide or obfuscate the origination of that crypto as it goes through the process through the mixers. Does that make sense?
And so the government has said that much of what goes through mixers is illegal activity. What do you think are some of the legitimate and illegitimate use cases for mixers? Why might the average person, besides the illicit actors, also be interested in using mixers?
Sure. Yeah, I love this question. So obviously mixers have, some illicit use, but, if you look back to the time of moonshine running, they had the cars with, going down the road, moving moonshine around the different counties. And that doesn't mean that the cars were bad. It just means that the use was bad. So a good use case for crypto mixers would be, for example, say you hold a great deal of crypto and you move it around and you're a legitimate businessman or a legitimate holder. You can use the blockchain to find out that, for example, Bob Smith has, $40 million in crypto somewhere, and that could make Bob, a target. So you don't necessarily want people to know how much crypto that you are specifically holding. So you may want to move it around to kind of cover your tracks a little bit. And we've had, in the past, we've personally worked, crypto cases involving kidnappings where people were able to figure out that so-and-so, a certain individual had a large amount of crypto and were kidnapped, to try to get a hold of that crypto. Another use case that we talk a lot about is, say that you do donations to a cause using crypto, which a lot of people do. And it may be a cause that either, your family may not agree with, or, your social circle may not agree with, but you still feel, passionately about this charity, and you want to give crypto to it. You may use a mixer to kind of cover up or hide what you're actually donating to, so your friends and family can't see that if they're into crypto as well. Does that make sense?
That's great. Thank you so much, John. And can you tell me a little bit as well about what are some of the different kinds of mixers? Are all mixers using the same kind of arrangement, or are there different kinds of arrangements with mixers?
No, there's several different types of mixers, and to go into the detail of each would take the entire time of this presentation. But you know, I think at the end of the day, there's these kind of professional mixers that are out there that do elicit, you know, finance movement or financial movement like Tornado Cash, that have a very good process of kind of exchanging crypto for other crypto within the mixer. You have the ability for two individuals to exchange crypto back and forth, and that would sort of mix the transaction. You have exchanges, for example, that, you know, if you conduct transactions, that could in a way, you know, be seen as not a mixer, but a way to obfuscate the origination of the crypto. Right.
All right, thanks,
so,
John.
if I send, you know, 5 Bitcoin to somebody from my Coinbase account, it would be very difficult for somebody to be able to say, hey, it came from Coinbase in most cases.
Thanks, John. That's helpful. Brandon, I'm going to turn to you very quickly about the view that the U.S. government has towards sanctions. Can you tell us what is it historically that the U.S. government uses sanctions for, and how do they determine when to use it and against whom?
So sanctions are the U.S. government's primary national security and foreign policy tool. In fact, sort of I challenge everyone anytime going forward you see any national security foreign policy issue, be it a military conflict, a terrorism attack, a major cyber incident, just wait a couple weeks and you'll ultimately see that part of the response involves sanctions in some way, shape, or form. And that's evolved over the years, but it's in part because the president there's a law that really empowers the president significant controls over our barring folks from individuals and entities from our economy for national security and reasons to protect the economy. So they doesn't need to go to Congress, doesn't need to change the regulation. You can ultimately issue an executive order and further that agenda. And it's something, it's an area that has evolved over the years. And what happens is the world of national security tools are sort of like the universe. It just always expands. And so it finds a new national security issue, a foreign policy issue. And then there's an executive order. And then now it is sort of growing conduct can be swept into it. So for example, with respect to Tornado Cash, you know, the mixer itself was not technically the target of the National Security Act. There's an executive order that was passed, executed years ago, that is meant to disrupt malicious cyber activity, but it's so broadly worded that it empowers the government to use that executive order and that tool to, you know, target individuals, entities, tools that the U.S. government perceives as facilitating or aiding malicious cyber activity.
And I should step back for a second and also ask about sanctions. What is the limit of sanctions? What are sanctions? What is it when we say that we're imposing sanctions that we're actually imposing?
Yeah, and it's a great question because it actually can sometimes appear limitless in terms of what it is. So, you know, sanctions, it is a tool that ultimately bars individuals, entities, countries from access to our financial system or engaging in transactions in or with the United States. And part of the reason why it can be so effective is the fact that the United States financial system is the dominant financial system. The U.S. dollar is the dominant currency. U.S. trade dominates the world of commerce. And so what it does is it's a prohibition. And the prohibition can come in 3 forms. One is called comprehensive sanctions. That in essence is an embargo. Think of Iran and Cuba. It bars, you know, with some exceptions, it bars U.S. companies, entities, individuals from engaging in transactions with Iran. It bars individuals in Iran from engaging in transactions with U.S. dollars. Again, there are exceptions, but it's country-based. The second is sector-based, and the best example of that is what we've seen in Russia. The sanctions don't prohibit all trade and commerce with Russia. It targets largely sectors, the energy sector, the financial sector, the defense sector, and it implements these prohibitions on those particular sectors and companies, entities that run in them. The last is what's called list-based. There's literally a list of blocked individuals and entities. It's called specially designated nationals. And what that is pursuant to these broad executive orders that I mentioned before that target a particular national security issue, there is a list that says now U.S. individuals and entities cannot engage in transactions with or provide services to individuals and entities on this list. So Tornado Cash and the 44 wallet addresses that were part of that sanction are now part of this list, and that's where the prohibition comes in terms of U.S. individuals and entities.
And Brandon, one of the things that is causing the community a lot of intellectual despair, confusion is with Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash doesn't seem to fit neatly into one of those three buckets that you listed before. It's not a country, it's not its own sector, and a lot of people argue that it is not a specific individual or a specific entity because it's an application. How have we seen the US government target an application like this before, or is this seen as, if it were an application, a novel use of sanctions?
So there is an unprecedented sort of aspect of this, but I think it's important to sort of take a step back, because I think part of this is it is different than what we've typically seen, but it's important to understand how broadly worded the authorities are for the executive branch, for the U.S. government with respect to sanctions. You know, when in terms of defining prohibition on property, it's tangible or intangible. Services are broadly defined. Words like indirectly and directly are sort of scattered throughout these types of sanctions. And so the reality is the president is empowered very broadly to institute certain measures. And so I don't say that to say, and therefore there aren't arguments to be made, but it's important to sort of keep in mind that in most instances, challenging sanctions is it's rare and it's incredibly difficult. And I think that there's another point as well. There are two parts of this. I think your initial question sort of goes to, and therefore, what prohibitions now occur with respect to engaging in either property with Tornado Cash or providing services connected to Tornado Cash. But there is a broader piece here to it, which is, you know, on the one hand, that there's, you know, you can decipher the language, but the government's actions here is intended to send a broader message. This isn't just about Tornado Cash. If you look at the press release and the language to it, it's trying to send a message to virtual mixers more broadly, indicating this is the type of compliance and diligence that we expect. And the fact that we've done this with respect to Tornado Cash means that we are willing to do this to other mixers. And so it's trying to change that behavior to effectuate what it perceives as its national security goal.
Okay, Brandon, really helpful. Thank you. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and turn to John. It's not typical that we would talk about sanctions and the First Amendment. This doesn't come up all that frequently. It comes up in this situation because of the belief that the OFAC has imposed sanctions on application, on code in this situation. John, I would love to have you unpack for us a little bit about what is the history of this concept of code as protected speech?
Yeah, and tying in some of the things that Brandon was saying to this, one of the things that we don't know here is precisely what was sanctioned. There have been other sanctions that OFAC has made where it was plainly obvious if you read what the sanction was, that the SDNs that were put on that were in fact essentially wallet addresses. And here they not only have something similar to that, but they mention Tornado Cash and other names for it. And it's not clear whether they are targeting the people running Tornado Cash, the people who have set it up, the people who have written it, or the software itself. And we've been asking OFAC for a clarification on it. Having read several of these myself, I think it's reasonable to suppose that the only thing that they're sanctioning are the wallet addresses. But we don't know because it's awkwardly worded. And if they are sanctioning the software itself, this is where it becomes a First Amendment issue. That going back through software and other things, particularly with cryptography and how you would do that. And this is where I have been involved with it, where even today, cryptography is considered to be a dual-use technology and is therefore regulated. But also GPS is also a dual-use technology that is regulated, and the software itself is in fact not essentially an action. And just like we don't sanction books, we sanction the use of the knowledge that is in books, we shouldn't be sanctioning the software itself. That a famous case from the late 90s that was Bernstein versus the government, that was a case that established that code is speech, as we put it, that writing down software itself is in fact something that is protected under the First Amendment. And it doesn't really matter what you think it is. Software that is flat out malware is protected under the First Amendment. It is using that malware that is the act that may or may not be illegal, if it was malware, for example. So no matter what your opinions on the mixers are, merely having the mixer software code is protected speech. It's First Amendment things. And in the case of Tornado in particular, because the Tornado code requires connecting it to the DeFi network, and so it's not something where some student is going to go look at a virus and thus set it loose on the world accidentally. You can't just go and set up Tornado Cash again and have it run. So it doesn't make sense from even a safety aspect to sanction the code itself. And that's what we want OFAC to clarify, that that's in fact not what they're doing, because that is a First Amendment thing.
John, you brought up a good point about the idea that Tornado Cash needs the DeFi network in order to run successfully. For the average person, what does that actually mean, that needs the DeFi network to run successfully? Otherwise, you can't just replicate it and then do it again elsewhere.
Well, Tornado Cash is essentially smart contracts that take money from one side and hand it over on another one to disrupt the connection between those two things. And so it has to be set up with the smart contracts and set up with the Ethereum blockchain, with the underlying smart contract software itself. You can't just start it on your computer and then poof, you're a mixer.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Brandon, one of the things that you mentioned about the goal of sanctions policy is to change the behavior of someone, something. In this case, if it's true that we have some uncertainties about what exactly is being sanctioned, whose behavior do you think is being changed? Is there a problem where we might have behavior that's being changed beyond the targeted wallet addresses? I know that you said that, there's also some sense of firing some message to other crypto mixers, but are we also capturing possibly people beyond the crypto mixers and average people in this changing of behavior?
So I think the answer is yes, or at least it's possible. And part of this is, I think, what the U.S. government would say, some of these difficult issues and unprecedented acts. Part of this is the U.S. government wanting the market to sort of sort itself out. It sends a signal, and it seems in this instance, some of the signal is perhaps not entirely clear. And it ultimately sees how the market responds. And if it doesn't respond the way it wants, it will send more signals. And so here, especially when you look not just the act, in part because, as we've said, Tornado Cash isn't really an entity, isn't a traditional entity. There's no fine to impose on Tornado Cash, for example. The signal is with respect to virtual mixers, the US government is saying there should be more diligence here. It is high risk. And that's language in the press release itself. That's not speculation, it's in there. And it is signaling, therefore, to other mixers in this space, to the cryptocurrency ecosystem, it wants more, it expects more. Now, to your point, well, virtual mixers is only a small subset of that ecosystem, and therefore, do you run the risk of sort of either having overcorrection or overreaction, and do you, by doing some of these conducts, lose part or some of the benefit of the ecosystem? And the answer is probably yes to all of them. But the point is ultimately, these acts aren't this isn't like a scalpel in terms of addressing the issue. And clearly this act was not the use of the scalpel. It was a hammer. It was a mallet. And sort of now what you're seeing is individuals and entities trying to figure out how to respond, how to comply, and then the US government will see. But what it does show, at least with respect to the virtual mixer space, an appetite to regulate in this space in a way that we hadn't seen before.
John, I'd love to ask you both about some of the perspective from different audiences that Brandon's now touched upon about what are some of these other people, these other entities thinking about. So Cafanick, if you could tell me a little bit about what might, again, the average person now who has used Tornado Cash for possibly being a high net value individual to move transactions so that people can't track that person and potentially make them a target for kidnapping, or the person who is trying to donate money to a cause, or my son who's trying to make sure that I don't find out what birthday present he got for me. He's 3.5, so he's probably not likely that he's using Tornado Cash, but I'm trying to understand, what are these people now thinking? Do you think that they are thinking like, what should I do? Or are they thinking, I'm not one of the 40 wallet addresses, nothing to worry about here?
Yeah, so the individual user that has no criminal use behind what they're doing. And by the way, Lincoln is smart. He could do these transactions very easily. He could. No, I think the average user that is not using it for illicit purposes doesn't have anything to worry about. I think even on the law enforcement side, one of the things that I enjoy most about this job is working with law enforcement that they understand crypto, they know crypto, they're intellectually involved in going after the bad guys, but they also step back and they understand the legitimate use cases for this stuff. So they don't stomp around saying, hey, mixers are bad, people who use mixers are bad. They generally understand the community and what's going on. So I don't think anybody's going after, the legitimate use case folks just for using these mixers. I think they definitely have a place in the crypto community. And just one more kind of an aside with this, the other thing I enjoy about the crypto community is the users themselves are also taking a look at what's going on with stuff. So you don't see people in the fiat currency world going, hey, I see this weird money movement going on over here. And most of the time they can't. So, and informing somebody about it, unless you're a financial institution or whatever. But there are a lot of users out there in the crypto world that say, hey, this looks suspicious. And they may notify somebody, or they may notify the community and talk about it and stuff like that. So I think it does have kind of a self-policing and self-governing kind of aspect to it, which I think is a very good thing.
Thanks, John. And John Callis, for John Cafanick just talked to us a little bit about what the average person might be thinking, but to dial in a little bit on what a coder or developer might be thinking about this and how they might be internalizing this signal that they might receive. What do you think that might be? How are they considering that in light of some of these First Amendment issues that you were talking about earlier?
I think that from this aspect of it, there is the reality that we are saying that writing software is different than running software. And also with these mixers, there have been people who have essentially been mixers by hand. And there have been other mixers, and this has been a thing where people who've done it by hand have been charged with money laundering, and there are other mixers that have done this sort of thing. But really, being a mixer itself is really asking somebody else, an intermediary, to hand over some money for you. And there are ways that we do that in the fiat world that include setting up a separate bank account, creating an LLC, and so on, that are the equivalent of this. And they are ways that you can take what you want to do if you're a high net individual in these other cases, and do it within the traditional financial system. For writing it, the issue is, what's the line between operating something and simply writing it? And I think that there are definitely things that tread closer to the line, which include, you connect it to the network, you do it with test things where you have to be permission to make sure that it works, and then you set it up so that anybody anywhere can do it. And I think that for a coder, when you do something like push it into production, that's where it starts to become an issue. And this is where they need to consider that this is where the difference between speech and actions become realized.
Okay, John, thank you so much for that. That was incredibly helpful too. So I feel like we have gotten a very good idea of this entire universe, which in just 27 minutes here. I will open up to the floor. If you guys have any last thoughts, any cocktail chatter about this particular issue that you'd like to share with our audience, and closing thoughts at all.
Maybe just one quick thought, because I think as we're talking about, especially with respect to tornado cash, there are a lot of unknowns here and sort of questions, and I think we're going to see in short order additional guidance from the Department of Treasury on some of these issues. Not all, but I think we will see some guidance, because there certainly are some, I'll say, unintended consequences and effects that have been talked about here as well, that clearly we're not, or at least should not be, the target. So we will get some guidance, but to be clear, I don't think we're going to answer all the questions that both Johns have raised, I think, on some of this. And part of that is intentional, because again, that uncertainty, I think the US government thinks inures to its benefit in terms of changing behavior.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the folks behind Tornado Cash are probably having a pretty bad time right now, but I think at the end of the day, Treasury has a really good view of things, and I think at the end of it, they'll have a better idea, and the rules and the way they approach this stuff will get much better.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I mean, the real issue here is that we can read what OFAC was saying and what it probably means and what it's reasonable to suppose that they mean, but it was awkwardly worded, and we need clarification from them on precisely what it was that they were doing. And that could be very simple. It could be simply saying, yeah, we're terribly sorry, we only mean those wallet addresses, and then that would clear everything up, and we would know what to say now. Right now, we're all speculating in this environment where we don't really know what the government said.
Okay, well, I want to thank all three of you again for joining me on short notice to have this really fulsome, comprehensive discussion about this issue. And I look forward to another conversation sometime soon. Thank you.